This is PI Health. What we're going to be talking about this time is Snowbirds, Passport Brothers, and Hoppers. So what are the Snowbirds? First of all, well, the Snowbirds, we call them Snowbirds, individuals who go to the north, to the south, south to the north. For example, in the winter time they come down from New York, they come down to Florida, or from Florida in the summertime they go back up to the north. So those are the Snowbirds. Passport Brothers is just another slang terminology for individuals who are hop on the airplane for a love nest, either to the Philippines or whatever. The Hoppers are exactly the same thing. Basically, we call them hoppers, individuals who are traveling to the island or to Central America for the same purposes. Okay, so what does a Snowbird, Passport Brothers, and Hoppers have in common? Well, let's take a look. First of all, they have what is known as a stroke. Now, why would they be getting a stroke? Okay, let's look at it. Let's look at the three characteristics of the blood. One of them is elasticity, stickiness, and viscosity. What is elasticity? Elasticity is nothing more, nothing less, except how rubbery actually the blood is. In other words, when you drop down the blood, you know, it splashes all over. I mean, it just makes a huge splash. So that's what elasticity is. Now, stickiness is when you cut your hands, let's say, okay, and then what happens is it has a tendency to stick together. Let's say when you cut your hand with a knife and just press on it with your other finger or your hand like this, and then what happens, it has a tendency to be sticky. Viscosity is how slimy it is actually, the blood. Now, all three characteristics is very important. This is important for clotting mechanism. This is viscosity, and elasticity is very important as the blood actually goes through the arteries or to the vein system. Now, as we're covering elasticity, stickiness, and viscosity, there's a couple of things that I would like to say about the stickiness and the viscosity. Yes, there is a blood test that measures stickiness. It is called fibrinogen. Fibrinogen level, it depends upon which particular laboratory that is being used, but the high number is approximately about 420, 425. Now, I like to use number around 300. There's a huge difference between 300 and 425. That's for my own, how should I say, information. So now, also on a sticky part, there is also known as a D-dimer. The D-dimer is also the particles of the blood that can actually stick together. It's called the D-dimer. On the viscosity end of it, yes, there is. It is also known as electrostatic mobility. I mentioned that one in the another video. So again, the same thing on a viscosity, electrostatic mobility. In other words, how quickly and how fast it goes from point A to point B on a meridian, on a fluid meridian, the blood between a positive and a negative one. Unfortunately, I do not know any blood test that would measure elasticity. Maybe there is one, maybe there isn't. I haven't come across. I tried to research that particular one in the on the net, and I was not able to come up with a elasticity part. That how would you measure the elasticity part? Now that's the point that we are talking right here. Okay, so what do we have here? We have here leaking artery, hemoglobin A1C 5.6. We have ejection fraction 50%. Weight from the leg, the success rate is 90% when we are harvesting actually from the leg, the vein. for transplant. And we have what is known as a blood pressure. Blood pressure normally is 120/80. Okay. The characteristics of the artery is that the wall is supposed to be very, very smooth. The trouble is we have what is known as a leaking artery. A leaking artery is very similar to the leaking gut syndrome. So terminology is actually the permeability of the digestive tract. So this is exactly the same thing. We have what is known as not smooth, but very rigid, and it has a minor tear in it. This is what we call leaking artery. Leaking artery can be very, very dangerous. We're not talking about aneurysm here, but we could throw aneurysm in there, but we are not talking aneurysm here. We are talking the leaking artery, where it's not smooth, it's very, very rigid, and it has a minor molecular tear in it. So what happens? When the blood pressure, let's say, goes up to 170 over 90 instead of 120 over 80, what happens? It will burst. This is what we call leaking artery. Now, contributing factor, of course, to that is a hemoglobin A1C. Let's say if you're a diabetic, we know that diabetes also breaks down the arteries and the walls. Ejection fraction. Well, that also plays a major role in it, because if you really look at it, this ejection fraction here, 50%, is not exactly a very high number for ejection fraction, but it's considered normal. Below that is abnormal. Above that is normal. So what we see is the inability of the circulatory system, even though the ejection fraction of the heart, as it pumps out the blood, what happens is it's relatively low here. Now, when you're harvesting from the leg for the let's say for a transplant to get to other parts of the heart, or bypass surgery, what happens? That's approximately about 90% successful. But there is another major problem here with that. When they are taking out harvesting the vein or some other format, what happens is they put a fluid pressure into the vein. And what happens is they clamping it here so that it doesn't go through. See how much fluid goes through, and there is a pressure that they are putting in here to see if there's any kind of a liquid leaking out from the vein that to be transplanted. That's the major point here. In other words, this portion is exactly the same as up here in the brain. The only difference is that they're putting a pressure in here to see if there's any leaking fluid in here. Here, what happens is, as you go up on the airplane, or as you're coming down from north to the south, the air pressure, the quality of the air is totally different from, let's say, from the mountains. You're coming down to the level of sea level. So what happens is this particular molecular tear into the arteries or to the circulatory system will just simply break. Because you already have a small amount of tear in there, except it is still going through to the blood in a single file. Of course, I'm not going to explain the complete system here, but this is exactly what happens. Of course, you have some valves in here, and you have some elasticity of the arteries and the capillaries, but it loses its elasticity also. It becomes very rigid. So if it becomes very rigid also, it just simply has a tendency to break also. So that has to be considered also. So what happens? Individuals that are coming from the north to the south, or they go up on the airplane, you know, that's why they tell you to walk around a little bit for the circulation on the legs, etc. the circulatory system, especially if you are actually taking some diuretics. What happens to the diuretics? That makes actually this whole entire circulatory system a little bit worse. Even the reason for that it flushes out all the nutrients that is water soluble. So you have to replenish it, but that's a separate issue. We're not discussing that issue. We are discussing the issue of breaking of the arteries or the capillaries, or just the whole entire circulatory system where you have the veins, arteries, and capillaries, all three of them, because it just can actually burst. Because of the, as I said, the atmospheric pressure, etc., going up in the air. Even if you are driving down, it takes 2 or 3 days, so the accumulation and accommodation, and it accommodates the body, it becomes better. So, with that note, this is a very, very small lecture on it, pointing out what happens, the capillaries or the leaking artery. This is what we're talking about, the leaking artery. This is how it occurs. Thank you very much for listening. Have yourself a wonderful day.